The market was alive that morning, buzzing with energy that twisted between laughter, greed, and cruelty. The smell of dust and sweat hung thick in the air. Sunlight beat down on the crowd, glinting off metal coins, jewelry, and the hopeful eyes of those seeking to buy or sell. But in the far corner of the square, beneath a torn canvas stretched between two crooked poles, something darker unfolded. A boy stood there, barefoot, wrists bound in rough rope, his clothes torn and caked in dirt. His hair clung to his forehead with sweat, and his eyes, blue as the edge of dawn, darted wildly from one stranger to another. His name was Elias, though no one here cared to ask. The crowd didn't see a name. They saw property. "Step closer, good people," shouted the auctioneer, a thick man with a red face and a grin too wide for his teeth. He smacked his cane against the wooden platform where Elias stood trembling. "A rare find today. Strong back, clean heart, untouched." A young virgin boy, barely 17. His words drew laughter and murmurs from the crowd, men nudging each other, women whispering behind gloved hands. Elias's heart hammered so loudly he thought it might burst. The rope bit into his wrists as he struggled to keep still. He wanted to run, to disappear into the chaos of the streets, but even if he tried, the guards would drag him back. He had seen it before. They always dragged them back. The auctioneer strutted like a rooster, his words slicing through the noise. "He's obedient, he's quiet, and he'll do as told. Start the bidding at 20 silver. A hand shot up. 30. Another voice called. 40. A third, 50. The numbers rose like waves, drowning Elias in panic. His breath came in sharp bursts. He tried to look anywhere but at them. He saw a child clutching his mother's dress, a man chewing on a stick, a woman fanning herself lazily, as if this were a simple trade, not the sale of a living soul. He closed his eyes and remembered the river near his old home, the sound of frogs croaking, the scent of wildflowers. He used to dream of freedom, of walking beyond the hills. That dream now felt like something cruel and distant, mocking him from another life. 80 silver, someone barked. The crowd gasped. That was a high bid. Elias dared to open his eyes. It was a man with a scar across his jaw, dressed in merchant's finery. His eyes were cold and calculating. 80 once, the auctioneer cried, his grin widening. 80 twice. And then, before the final word could fall, a voice cut through the noise, soft but steady. 100. The crowd fell silent. Even the auctioneer froze, his mouth open. Heads turned in unison toward the source of that voice. A woman stood there, cloaked in black, her face half hidden beneath the shadow of her wide-brimmed hat. Her gloved hand held a small purse that shimmered faintly in the sun. The auctioneer blinked, clearing his throat. "Madam, you wish to bid?" She took a step forward. The crowd parted as though by instinct. Her presence carried a strange gravity, elegant, poised, and untouchable. 100 gold, she repeated, louder this time. The murmur rippled again, but now with awe. No one offered gold for a common servant. No one dared bid higher. The auctioneer's voice faltered. "Sold to the lady in black." Elias's knees nearly gave out. He didn't understand. No one ever paid that much for someone like him. The woman approached the platform slowly. As she drew closer, the air seemed to change, cooler, quieter. The auctioneer, suddenly unsure of himself, stepped aside and held out his hand for payment. She placed a small velvet pouch into his palm. The clink of coins silenced the whispers around them. Then, without hesitation, she looked up at Elias. "Untie him," she said. The auctioneer stammered. "But, my lady—" "Untie him," she repeated, her tone like steel wrapped in silk. The guard beside the boy fumbled with the knot, cutting through the rope with a quick slice. Elias's wrists stung as the coarse fibers fell away. He rubbed them gently, blinking up at her, unsure what to say. Her face, now visible, was striking, not in the way of youthful beauty, but in the kind that comes with age and sorrow. Her dark hair was pinned neatly beneath her hat, and her gray eyes carried the calm of a storm waiting to break. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. Elias. Elias, she repeated as though testing the weight of it. "You're coming with me." She turned and walked through the crowd, which parted again in silence. Elias followed her, his legs shaking with every step. The marketplace that had once felt endless now seemed to shrink behind him. He didn't look back. Outside the market square, a black carriage waited. The driver, an older man with a white beard, tipped his hat as the woman approached. "Home, my lady?" "Yes," she said simply and climbed in. Elias hesitated, staring at the polished door and the crest engraved on its side, a silver lily surrounded by thorns. She glanced back at him. "Well, get in." He obeyed, sliding into the seat across from her. The door shut with a soft click, muffling the noise of the world outside. The carriage began to move. For several moments, neither spoke. The sound of hooves filled the silence, the rhythmic clatter almost soothing. Elias stared out the window, watching the dusty town fade into open countryside. His heart still pounded, unsure if this was rescue or another form of captivity. The woman finally broke the silence. "You were frightened back there," he swallowed. "Yes, my lady." "Don't call me that," she said, her gaze fixed out the opposite window. "My name is Seraphine." He nodded, uncertain how to respond. She didn't seem like anyone he'd ever met, neither cruel nor warm, but something in between, like a fire behind glass. After a while, curiosity overcame fear. Why did you buy me?" he asked softly. Her eyes shifted toward him, unreadable. "Because I don't believe anyone should be sold," she said. Then, almost to herself, she added, "Not again." The carriage hit a bump, jolting him slightly, and the moment passed. As the road wound deeper into the hills, Elias watched the scenery change. Fields of golden grass stretched toward distant forests. The air grew cooler, cleaner. Eventually, they turned onto a long gravel drive lined with trees that arched overhead like cathedral pillars. At the end of the path loomed an enormous mansion, its gray stone walls draped in ivy, its windows tall and dark. It was beautiful, yet strangely lonely. The carriage rolled to a stop before the grand entrance. Two servants rushed forward to open the doors. Seraphine stepped out first, her black gown flowing behind her like a shadow. Elias followed, his eyes wide. A woman in her 50s approached them from the doorway, bowing slightly. "Welcome back, my lady," she said. Her eyes darted briefly to Elias, but said nothing. "Prepare a room for him," Seraphine ordered, "and see that he eats." "Yes, my lady." Elias followed the servant through the grand hall. Chandeliers hung above them, their crystals catching faint light from tall windows. Portraits lined the walls, men and women painted in somber tones, their eyes following as he passed. The scent of old wood and candle wax filled the air. The servant led him to a small but clean room near the west wing. A bed, a basin, a window overlooking the garden. It was more than he had ever known. "You'll sleep here," she said briskly. "If you need anything, ask for Mrs. Hawthorne." "Thank you," he murmured. She paused at the door, studying him. "She doesn't bring people here often," the woman said quietly. "Be grateful, but careful." Then she left. When the door closed, Elias sat on the bed, running his fingers across the soft blanket. His mind spun with questions. Who was this woman? Why had she saved him? And what did she mean by not again? He looked out the window. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in deep orange and violet. Somewhere in the house, a piano began to play, a slow, mournful melody that carried through the halls. Elias stood, drawn to the sound. He crept quietly through the corridors until he reached a half-open door. Inside, Seraphine sat at the piano, her back straight, her hands moving gracefully across the keys. Candlelight flickered around her, catching in her dark hair. The melody rose and fell like a sigh. When she stopped playing, she spoke without turning. "You can come in." He froze. I didn't mean to intrude." She looked over her shoulder, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. "You didn't, I just heard you breathing." He stepped inside slowly. "That song, it's beautiful." "It was my husband's favorite," she said quietly. "He's gone now." Elias didn't know what to say. She closed the piano and stood, her eyes distant. "You'll be safe here, Elias. No one will hurt you again." He nodded, though part of him still feared this peace was temporary. "Go rest," she said. "Tomorrow you'll start helping in the gardens. The earth has a way of calming restless souls." He hesitated, then asked, "Why me?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then softly, "Because when I looked at you today, I saw someone I once failed to save." Before he could ask more, she turned and walked away, her footsteps fading down the hall. Elias stood there, his heart heavy with confusion and something else, something that felt like hope. That night, lying in his bed, he listened to the wind whispering through the ivy-covered walls. He thought of her voice, her eyes, and the strange safety he felt in her presence. He didn't know what destiny had tied their lives together, But deep down, he sensed one truth. This was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning. The road that led away from the market twisted through rolling hills and fields of tall grass that shimmered like waves in the afternoon sun. Elias sat inside the carriage, his fingers clenched tightly together, still half expecting to wake up back on that wooden crate with the rope biting into his wrists. The sound of hooves echoed rhythmically against the dirt road, a steady beat that only deepened the silence between him and Lady Seraphine. The interior of the carriage smelled faintly of lavender and old leather. Across from him, Seraphine sat with perfect posture, her gaze fixed on the landscape beyond the window. The veil of her black hat still shadowed her face, though now and then the shifting light revealed the faint curve of her lips, the sharp line of her jaw. She looked untouched by time, as if grief had frozen her into a portrait of poise. Elias watched her carefully, trying to make sense of her. She had bought him, yes, but not with the hungry eyes of those men in the market. Her gaze was steady, her words deliberate, her actions precise. She had spent 100 gold pieces on him, more money than he could ever imagine, and yet she hadn't looked at him like he was something to own. Still, he didn't understand her reason. The carriage slowed as they climbed a winding path through a dense forest. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy above, casting moving patterns of gold and green on the road. The air grew cooler, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Elias stole a glance at her again. "Do you live far?" he asked quietly. "Far enough," she said without turning. He swallowed and nodded, folding his hands again. I've never ridden in a carriage before." A faint hum escaped her, almost like a sigh, but not quite. "Then today is a first," she said. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it left little room for conversation. Elias leaned back against the seat, staring out the opposite window. The forest stretched endlessly, shadows shifting between the trunks. Every so often he thought he saw movement, a deer perhaps, or something else hidden just out of sight. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, and the road opened onto a valley blanketed in mist. And there, at the far end, stood the estate. The mansion rose from the earth like something carved from the memory of a dream. Gray stone walls climbed high, tangled in ivy that crept toward the roof. Tall windows lined the facade, reflecting the fading sun in fractured gold. A wrought iron gate bore the same crest Elias had seen on the carriage, a silver lily surrounded by thorns. Even from a distance, it felt both beautiful and haunted. The carriage came to a stop before the gate. The driver jumped down and swung it open with a low creak. As they passed through, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the wheels echoed softly in the stillness. When they halted at the entrance, two servants appeared, an older woman with tightly pinned hair and a tall man in a gray vest. They bowed as Seraphine stepped down, her long black dress whispering against the stone steps. "Welcome home, my lady," the woman said. "Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne," Seraphine replied. She gestured toward Elias. "Prepare a room for him. He'll be staying." Mrs. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but Elias saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "At once, my lady." Elias followed obediently as the housekeeper led him inside. The air within was cool and still, scented faintly of candle wax and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through high-arched windows, catching on chandeliers that hung like frozen rain. The sound of his footsteps echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the thick carpets that lined the hallways. The walls were lined with portraits, stern men in black coats, women with solemn eyes and pearls at their throats. Elias slowed, his gaze drawn to one in particular, a man with a narrow face and eyes so piercing they almost seemed alive. A gold plaque beneath it read, "Lord Edric Vale." "Don't linger there," Mrs. Hawthorne said without looking back. That was her husband. Elias tore his eyes away and followed. The hallway curved, opening into a smaller corridor that felt older, quieter. Finally, she stopped before a door at the end. "This will be your room. It's small, but it's yours. The bed's clean, the window opens to the gardens. If you need water, there's a basin in the corner." He stepped inside cautiously. The room was simple but warm. The walls were pale, the bed neatly made. A small wooden chest sat at the foot, and a single candle flickered on the table beside it. Through the window, he could see the sprawling garden below, a sea of roses, white and red, surrounded by tall hedges that seemed to guard the property from the world. "Thank you," he said softly. Mrs. Hawthorne turned to leave, but paused at the door. Her voice dropped slightly. "She doesn't bring people here, ever. Consider yourself lucky, boy, but be careful. The lady carries her ghosts." Before Elias could ask what she meant, the door clicked shut behind her. He sat on the bed, running his hand over the smooth blanket. The silence pressed around him, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves outside. He took a deep breath. The scent of roses drifted in through the open window, sweet, but somehow tinged with sorrow. As dusk fell, a bell rang faintly through the halls. Unsure what to do, Elias stepped into the corridor. He followed the sound of footsteps until he reached the grand dining hall. A long table stretched the length of the room, though only 2 places were set. Candles glowed softly in golden holders, throwing warm light against the dark walls. Seraphine sat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her gaze distant. She looked up when he entered. "Sit," she said simply. He obeyed, taking the seat opposite her. Servants moved silently around them, setting down plates of roasted chicken, bread, and fruit. Elias hesitated, unsure if he should wait for her to begin. "Eat," she said, slicing her food with delicate precision. "You'll need your strength." He nodded and began to eat slowly, careful not to make noise. The food was rich, the flavors unfamiliar. He hadn't tasted meat in months. After a while, Seraphine spoke without looking up. "You're wondering why I brought you here." He froze mid-bite. "Yes, he caught himself. "Yes, Seraphine." Her eyes lifted to his, sharp and gray. "Do you believe in second chances?" I'm not sure," he admitted. She set down her knife, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I do, or at least I want to." The flicker of candlelight danced in her eyes, revealing something beneath the calm. Something fragile, almost pleading. But before he could ask what she meant, she looked away again. "You'll work in the gardens during the day. Mrs. Hawthorne will show you what to do. In time, you may help with other things. I expect obedience, but not silence. If something troubles you, speak." Elias nodded. "Yes." She studied him for a moment longer, then rose gracefully. "Good night, Elias." When she left, the room seemed to lose its warmth. He sat there for a while, staring at the candle flames, trying to decipher her. She was kind, yes, but there was a heaviness in her eyes, a shadow that clung to her like perfume. That night, sleep came slowly. The mansion creaked with strange life. The faint clatter of distant footsteps, the soft hum of wind through narrow windows. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played a low, mournful melody. Elias lay awake, listening. It was the same tune she had played earlier, the same sadness woven into every note. It lulled him into dreams filled with faces he didn't know, voices whispering through endless halls. When morning came, Mrs. Hawthorne knocked at his door. "Up with you," she said briskly. The lady likes the gardens kept tidy. Outside, the world looked softer. Mist hung over the hedges and the air smelled of damp earth. The garden stretched endlessly, roses in full bloom, marble statues half hidden among the leaves, a stone fountain that murmured quietly to itself. Elias worked through the morning, trimming, watering, cleaning. Now and then he glanced toward the mansion, half expecting to see her watching from a window. And sometimes he thought he did, a silhouette, a glimmer of black fabric gone before he could be sure. At noon he rested by the fountain. The water shimmered under the sunlight, clear and cool. He dipped his hands in, feeling the chill run up his arms. "Do you like it here?" a voice asked. He turned quickly. Seraphine stood at the edge of the path, her hat shading her face. She wasn't wearing morning black today. Only a dark blue dress that softened her features, made her seem less like a ghost and more like a living woman. "It's peaceful," he said. She walked closer, her gaze falling on the roses. "I planted these after he died." "I thought As she turned to leave, he found himself asking, "And you? Who listens to you?" She paused, half smiling, without turning back. "No one has asked me that in years." Then she walked away, her footsteps fading down the path. That evening, as dusk painted the mansion gold, Elias sat by his window again, staring at the roses below. He didn't understand her completely, her sorrow, her secrets, but he felt something growing between them. Something unspoken, fragile but real. The mansion no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a waiting heart, one that had forgotten how to beat until he arrived. And as the piano played once more that night, Elias whispered to himself, "Maybe second chances do exist after all." The days began to slip into a quiet rhythm. Soft mornings filled with mist. Long afternoons among the roses and evenings when the piano's low notes drifted through the mansion like smoke. Elias found comfort in that routine, though part of him still carried a flicker of unease. Lady Seraphine was kind but distant, her mood shifting like the weather. Sometimes she would join him in the garden, her gloved hands brushing over petals as she spoke softly about the soil, the rain, or the fragile nature of beauty. Other times she would vanish into the west wing for hours, and no one, neither the servants nor Elias, would see her until nightfall. The servants treated her with a peculiar kind of reverence. They spoke her name in hushed tones, never gossiping, never questioning. Elias soon realized that the house itself seemed built from silence. Every wall held secrets. The hallways echoed with things unsaid. And yet he couldn't stop himself from wondering who she really was. One afternoon, as the golden light of late summer filtered through the trees, he found himself trimming roses near the old fountain. He had learned how to handle them by then, to wear gloves to cut carefully between the thorns. But that day, lost in thought, his finger slipped. Blood welled instantly. He hissed under his breath and lifted his hand. "Be careful," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Seraphine standing there. She had approached so quietly he hadn't heard her. She moved closer, her gaze falling to his hand. "Let me see. It's nothing," he said, embarrassed. "Just a small cut." She took his hand anyway, examining the wound. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, her fingers cool. For a moment he caught her scent, something faintly floral like lavender mixed with rain. "Even roses demand a price," she murmured. Her words lingered as she drew a white handkerchief from her sleeve and wrapped it around his finger with slow precision. When she finished, she didn't let go immediately. Instead, her eyes lifted to his, and for a heartbeat the air between them changed. Heavy, uncertain, almost fragile. Then she released him and turned toward the fountain. "You're healing faster than I expected," she said softly. Elias frowned. "Healing?" She didn't answer. Instead, she sat on the edge of the fountain, staring into the rippling water. "Do you believe people can change, Elias?" He hesitated. "I think they can try." A small smile touched her lips. "Trying isn't always enough." The water shimmered in the sunlight, distorting her reflection. For a long while, she said nothing. Then quietly, she began to speak. Not to him, but almost to herself. "I once thought I could change someone," she said. "I believed that kindness could soften cruelty, that love could rescue what was already lost." She glanced at him, her eyes dark with memory. "But some people are born with shadows too deep to escape." Elias didn't move. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something, a truth that had waited a long time to be spoken. Her voice dropped lower. "My husband, Edric Vale, was a powerful man. People respected him, feared him. They said he had a gift for persuasion, for control. But beneath all that charm there was rot. He traded lives the way others traded gold." Elias's stomach tightened. "You mean—" "Yes," she said sharply. "He bought people, sold them, broke them, and I stood beside him smiling at his dinners, wearing his name, pretending I didn't see the blood that paid for our wealth." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Elias stared at her, his throat dry. "I tried to save one," she continued. "A boy, younger than you. He was gentle, always looking out the window like he could see something better beyond the gates. I used to sneak him food, books. I told him that one day I'd set him free." Her hands tightened in her lap. "But my husband found out. He punished him to teach me a lesson. I remember his face that night, the terror in his eyes. And I remember thinking that if there was a hell, it couldn't be worse than this house." Elias felt his pulse thudding in his ears. The image she painted of the cruelty, the helplessness, it struck him like a blow. "He died," she whispered, "and I lived. That was my sin. I let fear keep me silent. I buried him myself under the old oak near the eastern wall. That was the day I stopped being a wife. When Edric died 2 years later, the world called it grief, but I called it mercy. Silence swallowed the garden. Even the wind seemed to pause." Elias didn't know what to say. He looked at her, not as the distant widow who had bought him, but as a woman who had carried guilt so long it had turned into part of her soul. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly. Her eyes met his again, and this time they were unguarded, filled with pain. "When I saw you standing there in that market, terrified and small, I thought, God forgive me, I thought it was him. For a moment I believed fate had brought him back to give me a second chance. Elias's breath caught. "I'm not him," he said gently. "I know," she replied. "But you carry his eyes. His quiet, his hope." He wanted to speak to comfort her, but words failed. Instead, he sat beside her on the fountain's edge. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It felt fragile, sacred. "You did save me," he said finally. "You may not have saved him, but you saved me." Her lips trembled, the faintest hint of a tear glimmering in the corner of her eye. "I don't know if that's redemption, Elias, or punishment." "Maybe it's both," he said softly. The corners of her mouth curved into a sad smile. "You speak like an old soul." "Maybe I had to be," he murmured. They sat there until the sun began to dip behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The air grew cooler, the garden bathed in fading light. For the first time, Seraphine looked peaceful. That night, when Elias returned to his room, he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in his mind. The cruelty of her husband, the boy she couldn't save, the guilt she carried like a scar. He lay awake listening to the creaks and sighs of the old mansion, wondering how much pain one heart could hold before it broke. Over the next few days, something between them began to shift. Seraphine smiled more often. She spoke of small things, the way the rain revived the roses, the sound of the fountain at dawn. Elias read aloud to her in the evenings from old books that smelled of dust and time. Sometimes she would close her eyes and listen, her head tilted slightly as if the words were washing something clean inside her. And sometimes she laughed, a sound so soft and rare that the servants would stop whatever they were doing just to listen. One evening, while the air outside hummed with the promise of rain, Elias found her in the music room. The piano was open, though she wasn't playing. Instead, she was standing by the window staring into the storm. "Do you ever wonder," she asked without turning, "if the people we've lost can still see us?" Elias stepped closer. "I think they can," she nodded slowly. "Then I hope he can see me now. I hope he knows I tried to do right this time." Before he could reply, thunder cracked across the sky, shaking the window panes. A servant rushed in with a letter, bowing low. "This arrived for you, my lady." Seraphine took it, her expression unreadable. The seal was dark red, marked with a crest Elias had never seen, a snarling wolf encircled by laurels. She broke it open and read quickly. As her eyes moved down the page, her face paled. "What is it?" he asked. She folded the letter with trembling fingers. "My husband's brother," she said finally. "Lord Alaric Vale, he's coming." Elias frowned. "Coming here?" "Yes." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, true fear flickered in her eyes. "He's claiming what's left of the estate. And he knows about you." "How could he know?" "Because nothing in that family ever stays buried," she said bitterly. Alaric was worse than Edric, cold, calculating, greedy. He thinks everything touched by this house belongs to him, including you. Elias's stomach turned. "I'm not his property." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "That's exactly what he'll argue. And in his world, money and blood speak louder than truth." He stepped closer. "Then we'll leave, tonight. You've done enough for me. I won't let anyone take me back to that life." Her eyes softened and she reached up, resting a hand lightly on his cheek. "You would run for me?" "I'd stay for you if you asked," he said without hesitation. For a moment, neither moved. Then she lowered her hand. "No, I won't run. I've spent too many years hiding from ghosts. If he's coming, then let him come. This time I'll protect what I should have protected before." The rain began to fall, pattering against the glass. She turned back toward the window, her reflection a ghost beside his. "Elias," she said quietly, "if anything happens, if I can't stop him, you must remember that I chose to fight, not to flee." He didn't like the sound of those words. "Nothing will happen," he said firmly. "We'll face him together." Her lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "Together," she echoed. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the garden below. The roses swayed in the wind, their petals scattering across the grass like drops of blood. In that flicker of light, Elias saw her not as a widow or a savior, but as a woman standing between two worlds, haunted by her past, yet unyielding against the storm ahead. He didn't know that within days that storm would come to her doorstep, and when it did, it would test every promise, every bond, and every fragile piece of hope they had built together.